Welcome everyone to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. Welcome to the first ever visual episode of A.Idle and also the first episode of the third season. So we're moving on up. We're changing a little bit. Season 3, I have some really exciting reads. Well, I think they're exciting. And some really interesting things that I've been working on for the past few months. So thank you all for returning. And thank you for all of the newcomers that are tuning in to see what all the hype's about. If you aren't familiar, we do have seasons 1 and 2 streaming currently on basically anywhere you can find podcasts. The most popular are probably Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but we're also distributed through Anchor, so you can find us there as well. And pretty much if you go to any of the social media pages or anything like that, there'll be links to Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So anywhere you find us, there will be a link to get to the next destination. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, there are a few things that I do a little bit differently than other book reviews, book review podcasts, book review people. Basically, I like to think of my reviews more on the analytical side than just giving you a rundown of the plot. So I like to actively read my books. And so I would be doing this normally anyway, and just dissecting things in my head. And so I figured it would be nice to share, this information with other people who may be interested in it, or maybe they're thinking about a specific topic that they aren't sure if they want to read the full book about. This can kind of give you a little bit of an indication of what's going on. So I go into reading most books just instinctually, thinking that most, if not all, things that the author wrote are intentional. So obviously they're including this information because they need us to know. With fiction books, there's a story, there's character arcs, so I just assume that a lot of the details are prevalent to the plot, and so that usually means something. With nonfiction books, obviously, most of that is researched in facts and statistics and references and things like that. So I like to read knowing that this information has been kind of put together for a reason. There is a point to it. So when I do my reviews, I like to give you, for example, like an overview of what the main themes may have been, or maybe talking about what the author may have intended for the audience to capture from his story, and what the audience actually did capture. Who was the intended audience? What was the impact of the book? Things like that. That's what I discuss in my book reviews. So if you're worried about this podcast potentially spoiling a good read for you, most of the time that doesn't really happen. If there is somewhere where I'm kind of walking around a spoiler, I will say a spoiler alert. But if you're an avid book reader, this podcast can really act as a companion piece. Whether you want to just use it as a preview and then read and take some notes, I guess, and use that to read along with the book, or you just want to come here for a cap of information afterwards. And for all of my non-readers, this will give you pretty much the gist of the book without telling you the whole story. So I know I said previously, like in one of my first episodes, like this isn't audible. Like I'm not reading, word for word what's going on. That's not happening unless some of the dialogue is like important. I won't be reading things like that. So that's what you can expect. Typically the episodes are about half an hour. It is only me, so I know you probably don't want to hear me talk for 2 hours. I know some podcasts that I listen to, it's 3 or 4 people and they're talking and it's like great, and before you know it, it's like, oh, that podcast is like 2.5 hours long. Not with me, because it is only me. Speaking of, before we get into the actual review today, if you ever hear me say we or us, which I believe I have done like a few times so far, I don't know where that's coming from, but it's only me. I read the book. I have my little notes. I do my reviews and my outlines, and then I record the episode and upload and all that good stuff. That's all me. So I think from being in organizations, in different groups, and even just working in the corporate world, I'm accustomed to say we. You know, I'm on a team, we're presenting this, we, it's just me. So if you ever hear that, I'm sorry. Although if you do visit our, there I go again, if you visit A.Idle's WordPress site, you will see that in addition to an introduction to me as a host, there is Kitty Boo Boo. Kitty Boo Boo is my cat. She has many names. She has many talents. She does not contribute to this podcast at all, but maybe that's the we I'm thinking of subconsciously. So that's pretty much it. If you want more information, if you haven't followed us already, feel free to follow on Twitter, which is at A.IdlePodcast, and Instagram, which is at A.IdlePodcast. And then I'll also leave like the email below, all that good stuff. And you can send any suggestions, any questions, any follow-up questions. Sometimes I will want like another perspective on a subject or a follow-up discussion to a specific book. I will invite guests on and do like a mini episode, you know, after the fact. So if anyone's interested in that, I totally am down. So any questions, feel free to submit them. With that being said, we're gonna dive into the first episode of season 3, which is Remembrance by Rita Woods. So Rita Woods actually released this novel in January of 2020. So it's still kind of brand new. And this is also her debut novel. And she's a Chicago native, she's a travel enthusiast. And after reading some of her information on her website, she did say that a lot of the research that she came across on her travels really contributed to the discovery stages of this book. And once you get into it, you'll see how well researched a lot of this is, because it is rooted in actual history. So Remembrance is really the story of the ultimate oppression and the answer to that ultimate oppression. The ultimate oppression being slavery, the answer to that being power. We follow 4 Black women across centuries coming into revolutionary gifts. Now, these gifts reveal energy fields that can act as a safe haven for those who may need it the most, but these characters are challenged with recognizing what's around them in order to manipulate a better outcome for those that may follow in the future. So this is really giving like a whole new meaning to freedom. It was a really cool read. Now, before we get into some of the character arcs, it's important to note that this book is presented in a braided structure. What that means is we have a few different timelines as well as perspectives weaving. Now, I also want everyone to understand that this is one story. So it's easy to think that this may be kind of like 4 completely separate characters, that maybe it's like the theme is kind of the same, but because they're in different time periods, they don't, you know, cross over or anything like that. It's presented to us a little out of order, but this is the same story. So when you're reading it, approach it as such. Now, this is also broken into different chapters of the characters, as well as 4 parts. There are 4 main parts, and what I find is if you've ever read a play, it kind of acts as like the act of the play, like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. And you'll feel the build in the tension and like the climax once you start getting further into the book. Now, in the order that we are introduced to these characters in these settings, first we meet Gael, who is a registered nurse in Cleveland, this is set in present day. Second, we meet Margot, who is a slave. This is in New Orleans in 1854. Third, we are introduced to Abigail, who is also a slave. This is in Haiti in 1791. And fourth, we are introduced to Winter, who is free. We meet her in Remembrance in approximately 1859. So throughout the story, power is always in the background. The following characters, I pulled them out to talk about because they're important, mainly because they are central to this power, this magic that is going around. All right, so first we have Gael. Now, when talking about these characters, I've kind of assembled them on a power structure. So Gael being in, I would say, the beginner stage of this power. She's just coming into realizing what she is capable of. This is also the only character that we get very little page time from. So we get to read about her maybe a handful of times, and her sections, her chapters are like 3 or 4 pages long. Now, with that being said, if we're looking at everything being intentional, it's important to note that is, that's happening. So why are we not getting this information? My theory is because she's at the beginning of her power stage. So we're looking at the different kind of levels of mastery here. And because she hasn't really accomplished much in that realm of magic, it's not really necessary to give her as much page time. But she is a character that is very hardworking, very loving. She's a blue-collar worker, living basically paycheck to paycheck. She's scraping money to put her sister through college. Her current thing that she is fighting against is this economic slump that she's in. This is almost like the modern challenges that, we all can kind of relate to. And I believe that's another reason why this character was put in the book, because when we talk about things like slavery, which we're going to get to in just a second, we've all learned about it. We know it's horrific, but for us, we're living in this world where slavery doesn't exist, quote unquote. We'll get to that. And so this is kind of how we can relate to this person. So this person, we want her to win because we know how this is, we know how it is that you live in paycheck to paycheck. So next oh my gosh, I hope that didn't pick up. I'm so sorry. Okay, so next we have Winter, who, if we're looking at the power structure, she is the predecessor to Gael. So she's in the emerging power stage. What that means is she's aware that she has this power and she's learning to use it. She does not have control over it yet. She's also the only one that interacts with the other 3 women. She's present during multiple timelines, which again does not mean she is a time traveler. It just means that she pops up in their own story. She's the only one that does that. She is very emotionally driven, which kind of puts her in the realm of being naive. And this is because when you aren't able to control your emotions, you're not really tapping into that realm of power that is necessary to actually make change. And that's why people kind of, shrug her off. Like, she's not really gonna do anything with those powers. The people around her know that she's powerful, but they also know that she's unstable at this point that we meet her. Now, she's an outlier, and I say this because not just in the book, but when you turn over the back of the book and you read the little summary on the back, she's the only character that is not mentioned there. We get a little introduction to the other 3 women. We do not get one on her. Again, if we're reading actively, that's kind of weird. So when you're going through these chapters and this perspective pops up, it goes without saying that, okay, she's important for a reason. Now, she, again, is the only free person that we meet in this story. Everyone else has earned their freedom, but Winter was never a slave. And therefore, she never really belonged in Remembrance. Remembrance is, yes, a place of freedom, but it's a place of freedom for people that have endured this harshness of slavery and this brutality. Her particular peace has yet to be created. Remembrance is not her peace. And that's kind of why everyone kind of gives her the cold shoulder, because she's never experienced the roughness before of the world. For that reason, she's almost envied by those around her, not really honestly about her powers, more about the fact that she's never been a slave. She doesn't have that emotional trauma. And also, just to add in a little touch of colorism, she's also described as being fair-skinned. So that's another layer of, things that these slaves were dealing with, in addition to the harshness of just being a slave in general. Colorism was also still there. Now, with Winter, we see that because her peace is not in Remembrance, she can use her powers for good there, but she's not really made for that position. She's made to create her own way. So if we're looking at this power structure again, I would say that she is to usher in some type of safe haven for her generation. So we meet her in approximately 1859. Historically, we know that this is on the brink of slavery being abolished. And so just inferring from, after looking at all of the other characters, it's probably her destiny to create some sort of area and space and time for maybe those that will be suffering from sharecropping very shortly. Slavery is over, but we all know that the hardship is not. And so each generation has their own thing that they are struggling against, and each woman therefore is challenged with combating that. Now we see with Abigail, who is next, who we'll talk about, she is the predecessor to Winter. She came before her. I would say she is in the final, most intense stage of power. That power that she's mastered it so well, but it's almost getting a little too much for her. She's done everything that she could to create Remembrance. She is the creator of Remembrance. She literally made a place in time and space for runaway slaves. And so for her generation, this is crazy. Like this is what, people were, escaped slaves were trying to get to. They were trying to get to freedom. A lot of them were trying to get to Canada, but this is literally just a space in the middle of nowhere that she created. Now, her aliases in the book, she also goes by Mother Abigail, both interchangeable. That kind of goes without saying that with age, her names change a little bit. People see her as Mother Abigail once she gets a little bit older. And then also Priestess and Babalawo. I believe I said that right. So her characteristic, she's very powerful again. She's also very vengeful, which they all pretty much have a reason to be at this point. She's also protecting, she's giving, she's loving. She created Remembrance, so all of this makes sense. And she's the only one that is originally from Africa. So with Flashbacks, we're able to see that she was actually kidnapped from her tribe in Africa, brought to Haiti, and then so on, then eventually to Remembrance. Now, before we get to the fourth woman, I want to talk about Josiah. Josiah is very interesting. I would say he's arguably the main character of this book, not because he gets the most page time. I don't think we actually ever get his perspective. I don't think we follow him exclusively. He's just always there. I would say because he's always there, he's present in all timelines, and his physical appearance changes according to the amount of power that whatever woman he's with at the time has. So I would say he's the physical embodiment of these powers, of this energy. However, I would also say he's almost like a rechargeable power source. So for example, if we're looking at all of these ladies as being the masters of the power, at some point they'll get to that stage. It's up to them to keep the balance. So if they lose their powers, he loses whatever it is that he has within him. Then he has to go to the next one. And so that's why he's present in all timelines, because when the predecessor ultimately is no longer useful, he has to find another source to either charge him, or in order to charge, it's kind of this weird thing where it's like, I don't know if he's really the source so much as he's kind of like what the power is going through. It's going through his body, you know? It sounds very strange, but I love it that it's never really defined. The power is never really defined, and neither is Josiah. So an example of what I was just talking about would be that his power is equal to Abigail's mental strength. So when she gets a little bit older and a little, dare I say, senile, he starts to get weaker. And so you can see that connection there. Now he's powerful, but he's also really intimidating and standoffish. He's really mysterious, you know, he doesn't really hang around people too much, but he's also neither good or bad. And when I was searching for a word to describe this, the only word that came up was neutral, but I don't think he's neutral. I think it's more so that he's necessary. Neutral implies that he doesn't really get involved one way or another. I don't think that's pretty accurate. You know, through his actions in the book, we can tell that he's, you know, obviously on the side of slavery is bad. Hello, you know, he's fighting with the slaves against these slaveholders and slave catchers, and he's all about, you know, asserting the power that they now have. But he just, you know, he's present during the best and the worst moments in the plot. And sometimes he intervenes, sometimes he does not, and he just kind of observes. And so I feel like he's just supposed to be there, you know? He's just there. He has to be there, or else the world doesn't go around. I don't know. So he also is, he connects all four women. He is introduced to all four women. He's also present during all four timelines. And the interesting thing about him is, when he's present during all four timelines, his age is not chronological. So that's another thing. Like, I feel like he's immortal. And so I put here, it's really funny, I put here that his predecessor is the beginning and his successor is the ending. I think he's just always going to be around. I don't know. So what is his purpose? I feel like his purpose is to be the guiding light to these women. He really does act as, you know, some sort of guide in this spiritual realm, you know, acts as a teacher almost. But it's also the preservation of energy, you know. It's like he's protecting this energy, and he's making sure that the people that possess it use it wisely. And then, you know, when they're done using it, he's on to the next one. A very interesting character. Very interesting. I would love to know, like, if anyone else read this book, what they think of him, because I feel like he's very creepy, and like everyone who encounters him gets bad vibes, but I just don't think he's bad. I think he's just there. Like, I don't know. Anyway, and lastly, we're going to talk about Margot. So Margot is an anomaly. I feel like she's a deviation from the pattern, in the sense that she's not on the power structure that I've built in my mind. She has some powers, but her powers are not really used at all for the plot. So it's interesting that she was even introduced. I mean, her entrance into Remembrance is kind of like the catalyst to the change in the community, the change in the plot. It kind of kicks things off. And that's shown through where it was once a peaceful place in Remembrance. After her arrival, that's when the violence erupts. That's when Abigail's mentality starts to kind of look like it's cracking a little bit. But then we have Josiah, who says to Margot, "You are supposed to be here." So you know what? I don't understand. This is what I don't understand. On the back of the book, I keep going back to this because I picked the book up and I saw the 3 characters that were listed, and it was Margot, it was Abigail, and it was Gael. So I was like, oh cool, these are the 3 people. But Margot to me is not really necessary to the plot. I don't understand why she was there. The plot, if you take her out of it, the plot still goes on. Again, she has some powers, but nothing ever really happened with that. And she is sort of connected to Mother Abigail through a slavery lineage. But other than that, I just can't understand why she was in the book. And I can't understand why she was included on the back cover instead of Winter. So in addition to the Josiah thing, I would love to know if anyone else has read it, what their thoughts on her character are, because I feel like it's kind of unnecessary. I'm sorry. Her story was messed up, and it was nice to, well, not nice. It was good information to kind of see the traveling of a runaway slave to Remembrance and like what that whole thing would look like, but I don't think it was really necessary. But that's just me. Anyway, so now that we've gone through the characters, I want to talk about the literary devices. Now, this may be boring to some people, but I think it's important to note that some of the stuff that they taught us in English class is actually relevant, and this is why. For example, we have flashbacks. So flashbacks are past events being framed for the present. This is how we're able to piece together Abigail's background. So we don't really get a lot of information on her, how she was kidnapped, how she was brought to Haiti, all that good stuff. But the information that we do get is framed through flashbacks. Everyone loves a good flashback. Then we have perspective, which in this case, we have third person. That's where we have the ability to follow each character and gain more information. We kind of know more information than the character itself. What I like about Rita Woods, though, is that even though we knew certain stuff that the characters didn't, we weren't given all of that information at once. So we were given the information when we were ready for it, when it was necessary to know. And I love the way that kind of plays along with the mystery of it, you know, not just knowing everything and just watching a character be stupid. It's kind of like those scary movies, like I can't. So I like that she limited, you know, and was selective on when the audience would know certain things. So next we have imagery, and this is important because, like I said, with the whole power thing and the whole magic, it's never really described in one word or one sentence or one paragraph. It's many things. And so imagery really helped to bring it to light, to be able to wrap our heads around it. So for example, we have literal imagery, which is a lot of the setting was described in great detail. For example, there were a few scenes in like the woods and things like that, as well as when the weather came through, the winter weather, which is very important. We were able to almost visualize it just off of the writing that Woods did in this book. Then we have figurative imagery. One cool thing about this was that Woods used the personification of things. So for those of us that don't remember, this is when you give things people qualities. And this is, for example, something like the ground breathed beneath my hands, you know, to describe how the power was, you know, flowing through her to the ground and vice versa and things like that. We're able to see, okay, this is how her power works to her. it's mainly used to just give the magic of visual. Another thing is symbolism, which we're probably all familiar with symbolism. This is just something that represents something larger. For example, remembrance is a physical symbol of freedom. You know, that's where a lot of the slaves escaped. There, they were able to do what they wanted, you know, live, have children, work when they wanted, you know, eat what they wanted, all that good stuff. But it's also the literal symbol of the powers that Abigail has. So because Abigail created Remembrance, it also served as a timeline for her health. So when it was going good, it was going good. But when Remembrance, you know, was tested, that's when her health was tested. One cool quote that I liked from Josiah was, "Everybody, everything serves a purpose, but it is not always the same one forever." Do with that what you want. And also another cool thing to kind of give the magic, you know, some type of image is, I would say fire symbolizes the magic materializing, you know, warmth. That's one thing that contrasts the winter weather, and it also is like a precursor to the magic is coming, like they're about to use the magic, or however it affects them, it's about to come out. Second to last thing, colloquialism. This is basically characteristics of ordinary conversation. So being that this is set in the late 1700s, 1800s, and even when we get to present day, there are certain aspects of conversation that it wouldn't make sense for slaves to be speaking even how you and I are speaking right now, because it's a completely different century. And also slaves kind of have their own slang, their own language, their own dialect and diction. For example, things like ain't, yonder, or finna, things like that, you know, it gives it an authenticity. If a slave was like talking like a founding father, that's not, you know, not gonna happen. And lastly, euphemism. So euphemism is the substitution of an expression thought to be harsh. So for example, the Underground Railroad is a euphemism for, you know, slaves running away, or the Promised Land is a euphemism for freedom, things like that. So all of these devices were used in this book, you know, without her saying, okay, this is a euphemism, blah, 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 in order for the audience to be able to put themselves in the setting and understand the themes. So now, speaking of themes, so one cool theme that I pulled out, and just being able to visualize, if we take again a look at the power structure, generational trauma. Each generation, each character, they're experiencing a different type of trauma. So obviously we have slavery, then we have racism, then we have poverty, which is what Gael is you know, struggling with, or colorism, or things like that. I believe that each woman, they have that power to combat whatever the major trauma is that's going on within that generation. Now also, of course, the spiritual realm, this magic well that they're pulling this energy from, that's a major theme. It's something that they're able to tap into. It's almost like an ancestral guide. It's a necessity in order to navigate their powers properly and use them in the way that it was intended to be used. This is where we get into the debate of Black magic versus Christianity. So a lot of these slaves, if you aren't aware, slaveholders were very firm in Christianity, and Christianity said slavery was right and blah, 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 blah. So anything other than Christianity was basically seen as the devil. And so when some of these characters use their powers, even sometimes to benefit their slave masters, you know, it's looked down upon because that's looked at as not godly. And so we have this whole thing where Christianity reigns supreme for slave masters, but the Black magic, which is seen as the devil, that's really the key to freedom in this instance. And then we have the double entendre with black magic, black race, and then magic. It's like, you know. Lastly, this whole idea of meditation, it's interesting because it's never explicitly stated, but in order to accurately and correctly tap into these powers, the characters have to go into sort of a trance, some sort of meditation. We see it probably most clearly with Abigail, probably because she has mastered, you know, the higher levels of power, where you have to quiet the rest of the world out in order to open that channel of communication with the ancestors, so you can, you know, gain that knowledge and then grab onto that magic and use it for what you need to. It directly affects the access and the control to the power, but it also gives you the ability to weaponize that anger and weaponize that rage. So that's something that it's a struggle that all of them are trying to overcome. And once they, you know, get the meditation part down pat, it's like opening and closing a door to access that magic when they need it. So now I want to talk about motifs before we get into the final review. So motifs are kind of like themes, but they're kind of just like in the background, not as prevalent. I think probably the main thing here is weather. So winter, we have a character named Winter, but also we see in most of the settings here, it's cold, it's snowing, it's a harsh winter, which is presenting a very big obstacle for those that are trying to escape slavery, obviously, but it's almost like the winter and the cold is followed by tragedy. Slaves are running away during snowstorms. It's basically impossible. And then we have the kind of backside of that where it's like the fire, you know, this heat that rises up inside of them when they're accessing the magic, you know, that combats that coldness. And then we seem to follow each character in the colder months. And then, you know, obviously in contrast to the power and the magical fire that they kind of conjure up. And lastly, pretty cool, Gael says towards the end of the book, and I quote, "Winter is gone." So that's a double meaning. That's the rise of her power. The heat is coming up, you know, the winter, the cold is gone, but also that Winter, the character, is gone as well. And then another motif, interestingly enough, is Haiti. I just put this in here because I didn't know if there was going to be more done with Haiti, but it seemed to be like the root of it all. And it's funny because, like, I've always heard, I mean, I don't know much about this particular topic, but that Haiti is one of the main places for where things like black magic originated. And I say black magic because I don't think it's necessarily called that, but things that I'm thinking of alternatively to Christianity, a lot of people always say it like originated in slavery in Haiti. Now that wasn't mentioned here, but that's just something that I was thinking of because we have this theme of black magic. We have where it seems like a lot of these slaves and the slave masters and their families are from Haiti. It's Abigail's first plantation. Gael experienced the earthquake in Haiti with her family, obviously years after Abigail, but and it's also the birthplace of Margot's master. So that was a cool thing that was just mentioned in the background. Now, for my review, first I want to say I picked up this book because I read the back of it and I was like, okay, I'm gonna get this because it sounded like what I thought the movie Antebellum was gonna be. So for those of you that don't know, I think Antebellum probably came out a year or two ago, and from the trailer it looked like it was set in slavery, but it also looked like there was some sort of time travel going on. That's what I thought this book was gonna be, because Antebellum, from what I hear, kind of flopped. But that's really why I picked up this book. But as you all know, there's no time traveling in this book, but it's not as different as I thought it was gonna be, but it's very good, especially for a debut novel. Like, Rita Woods is awesome. I think that the mysterious connections are the things that hold your attention the most. Even with me explaining some of the things that I've pulled out, you know, it still holds your attention, because it's like, okay, why is this person here? How did this happen? Like, what timeline are we in again? It's pretty interesting, and it makes you really pay attention. This is also one of the few stories where it's like, it's a slavery story, but there's also some sort of liberation. And that liberation doesn't really come at a large cost, like you're losing your whole family, but hey, you're free. You know, we're in this story, the slaves are given some sort of power, some sort of dignity back, you know. They made a whole place for themselves. That's all, you know, they really wanted, was to be free and have their own home and do all these things and work and play and eat and laugh and love. I love that about this. And third, it's magic, it's sci-fi. Like, this is some cool stuff. And I really like how she never really defined the magic or the power or the ancestral realm, whatever it was. She never gave it a definition. There were so many interpretations of it, with each character touching this energy, you know. They revealed different things, you know. So I loved it. I love this sci-fi stuff. I thought it was great. I would totally read this 9 times out of 10, without a doubt. This was amazing. I recommend it to everyone, you know. It does cover heavy topics. You know, slavery is not, just because they have a place of freedom doesn't mean this is like a really feel-good story, you know. There were some parts where it was kind of difficult to stomach. And I know lately it seems like there's so much stuff going on in the world that you probably just want to read something fun and light and happy. But I do think this is worth the read, just off of Rita Woods' writing alone. And I definitely will support any other books that she has coming out. I would definitely recommend everyone going to her website. Just take a look around, you know, see if you like anything. And thank you all. This is the conclusion of first episode of season 3. This episode was a little bit longer, but just because we had the introduction in there. Again, please follow A.Idle on Twitter at A.IdlePodcast, on Instagram at A.IdlePodcast. If you want to email me suggestions, A.IdlePodcast@gmail.com. Other than that, thank you so much for tuning in. This is really fun for me. This is cool doing the visual things. I really am interested to know like how this goes visually, like how you guys like this. So if you're listening just on the audio, definitely take a look at the video. Tell me what you think. Give me some feedback. Please be honest, okay? We don't do that lying stuff over here. Thank you and have a good weekend.